Hello, welcome to the May 21st, 2024 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Nuendo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can ask questions in the live chat field, or you can email questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, you're always at my ability to answer questions in kind of a real-time manner. Let me just go ahead and mute one of my monitoring computer here quickly. Sorry about that. All right. My ability to answer questions in a real-time manner will soon be eclipsed. I'll try my best throughout the live stream to catch up and get through all of the questions. But if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could avoid asking the same question over and over again, that just kind of slows down the whole process. We should have an index of all topics covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field with timestamps, so you could easily search for the different topics that are covered today. Also, if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating a wonderful website. We also, and we see he's on, and we hope that your girlfriend had a great gig over the weekend. Jan had to miss Friday's live stream for a dress rehearsal, so we hope everything went well. We also want to give special thanks to two people as service moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. So they're not Steinberg employees, they just do this to make it a better community experience, so we'll give special thanks to them. And also we'll give a special kudos to Jazz Dude for his work with the Cubase Nation Discord. So it's the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Nuendo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. I primarily focus on Steinberg products, and I am presenting from just outside Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. If you are watching us live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. Just one quick programming note. We will not have a live stream next Tuesday on the 28th. I have to go up to Boston for the day for a meeting. So I just want to give everyone a heads up with that, but we should have meetings on this upcoming Friday and the Friday after, which will be on the 31st, where we'll have our Zoom meetup. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we have the Pentagon Audio Manufacturers asks, hi Greg, is there a simple way to batch export, import user-created logical editor presets and track presets in order to migrate them to a new system with a fresh installation of Cubase? So the easiest way to do this is if you go to your Edit menu and go to Profile Manager. And what you can do is on your old system is export your profile, and on the new system, simply import it. That would include all your track presets, your user-created logical and project logical editor presets, workspaces, and key commands, macros, etc. So go to your Edit menu to Profile Manager, and you want to export the profile on one computer and import it onto your new computer. All right, we see Jovanovic 3D saying hello from Slovenia. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we had the Professor WM says, hi Greg, there are two questions on floating points. I have to split it due to its size. First, is it faster or even slower to use 64-bit floating points instead of 32-bit in Cubase's processors are anyway 64-bit and access memory in 64-bit chunks? So the memory is completely separate for this, so we can think of this as kind of the calculations that are needed. So when we look at particular, if we go to your studio menu to VST plugin manager, we could see which plugins are 64-bit floating point compatible. So first off, to start this, you could change your processing precision in your engine to be 32-bit floating point or 64-bit floating point. Then when you come into, and I have mine just running as 32 on my studio computer, I have it set for 64-bit float. And then I think if we go to I may have to be in 64-bit float. But you could see kind of, I think once you're in 64-bit float, you could see which plugins are 64-bit float. So, and that means that the processing precision is 64-bit floating point. It doesn't have anything to do with memory allocation or memory addressing. So if you're running in 64-bit floating point and all your plugins are capable of 64-bit floating point, it will be slightly faster because it doesn't have to truncate down to 32-bit floating point and then back and then basically convert down to 32-bit floating point for a process and then go up to 32-bit floating point once that process path has completed. So if everything is at 64-bit floating point throughout the entire signal path, that will be slightly faster. Is it possible you may not notice a huge difference with a modern processor? That would be the case often. So, but theoretically going full 64-bit and not having to kind of go down to 32-bit floating point for a particular plugin, if it's all 64-bit, that will be faster. All right, so the Professor WM says, second, does Cubase do something against denormalization of floating points as you'd lose one digit and have only 23-bit mantissa left, i.e. losing one digit of resolution? So I don't think that you will, if everything is going in floating point, so I don't think that you would lose one bit. Maybe I'm mistaken and not understanding, but, if you're playing back a 24-bit audio file and then it's processed, once you do any processing in a mixer, apply any EQs, plugins, alter the gain, at that point it would be in the 32-bit or 64-bit floating point. So, and within the floating point, you're not going to lose anything like during the mixdown process. So, but let me know if I'm misunderstanding. All right, so we see from Jovanovic 3D question, how to map samples like 909 from Howling in Sonic Drum Kit to Groove Agent pads or use directly in sampler. Okay, so let's say I just had a kick drum here that's going on Howling in Sonic. So we'll play back this kick drum. So I just loaded up Kick Shop, which is all just different kicks. So let's say I took this kick and I have a MIDI event here where we just have one note for one beat. So we'll listen to it. So if I have a MIDI event and it's in an instrument and I wanted to employ this in the sampler, I could open up the sampler control, drag and drop that sample, and now we can just come over here and we have this that I can play from my MIDI keyboard. If I wanted to take this now into Groove Agent, we see these three arrows here. We could transfer to an instrument, and I'll say I want to transfer it to Groove Agent SE. We do that, and now the sample is automatically carried over and created into a Groove Agent SE instrument. So let me know if that's helpful. So, again, just open up the sampler control, drag a MIDI note that's being routed to the virtual instrument, drag that into the sampler control, and you've made a new sampler track that easily. Let me know if that's helpful for you. Wonderful Steve Daniel says, Greg Sensei, it's amazing to learn from the master again, so we're glad you can make it. Hopefully you didn't get a parking ticket last Friday from where you parked quickly to make the live stream. It's wonderful to see you on. Always wonderful and great to see our very loyal attendee Uno Memento from Finland, where it's sunny and 15 degrees. All right, we have Robbie Bowling, another very loyal attendee from Dallas, Texas. We see Benny from Sweden, where it's 23 degrees Celsius. It's getting crazy. All right. All right, we see Tim K says grateful to be able to join again from Zeist in the Netherlands. All right, so we have we see Soren Sir N68 says he's here for the primetime show like this in Sweden from Vasteras. All right, so we see Jason Sykes from Southfields, England. Thanks for joining us. Razel Zamini from Denmark. Great to see you on again. Matt Elston. All right, we see Terry Gray checking in from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Enjoyed listening to your piano performance. Fantastic to see Dallas LaRue from Las Vegas. Glad you can make it back. We missed you the last few live streams. We see Tiago from Brazil. All right, so we see from questions says Cubase several times I've had issues with hanging at the hub screen and not being able to start a project. So make sure sometimes, make sure I haven't run into that. Maybe if other people have. So if we go to like new project and we're in the hub here, but just out of curiosity, make sure like you don't have any other, maybe a plugin, like this plugin cannot be loaded type, window in the background. So maybe there's another active window in the background, something like that, that's maybe preventing, that's taking over priority. So check that if you run into that again. All right, so we see the Professor WM says you should talk to your developers as this is a problem of floating points. I'll see if I get some more information from them. All right. Okay, so Tiago asks, question, is it possible to auto-quantize velocities in real-time MIDI input? So if we wanted to fix velocity so that no matter how hard we played, I'll just load up a quick. Okay, so if I play very soft or very hard on my controller keyboard, we can see that we could have kind of different velocities for different tones. But if I wanted the velocities to be fixed, we could do this just by going to like the project input transformer if we wanted to. And we could say we want to transform, and we'll start from scratch. We'll say we want to take notes, and we want to take the velocity, and we want it to be equal to 100. So I'm going to go to this track here where we're at. We're going to activate the input transformer. So now, as soon as we have this kind of turned on, so now it's just going to be a fixed velocity. So at this point, we could just choose that this velocity will only be 100 on input, so that as you record, we could just simply have every velocity be at this particular value. So try with the input transformer as well and see if that makes sense. All right, wonderful to see Martin checking in from Germany. All right, we see Daniel was successful and didn't get a parking ticket. That's good. Okay, so we see just a quick question. Hello, sir. How to match BPM of many loops? So a lot of times when we're working with loops, We'll just do new project here. Okay, so a lot of times when we have loops, loops may have tempo information embedded in them. So when we want to come over here, we can say, okay, let's go over here to our loops. So let me just find a couple like drum loops here. Okay, so let's say I want to take that drum loop. Now, when I have this on, we can see that a lot of the drum loops that are going to be sold, commercially, will have kind of like a number here. So we see this is going to be 140 beats a minute. We see that this loop is going to be probably whenever you see a number of 096, that means that tempo there is going to be probably 96 beats a minute natively. Now, I could audition these particular loops, and if I turn this icon off and I listen to it now, we could have it not play back. So I'm going to drag this loop over, and we have something called musical mode. So as soon as I come over here, we could place these different loops right here into musical mode. So if we have these not in musical mode, these aren't going to play back synchronized. So we listen to it. So if we copy this out, I'll just take this one and we'll make repetitions of it. And when we go to look at our loops in the pool window, we could come over here. We can see we have two audio files. One is at 140 beats a minute. One is at 96 beats a minute. So if you know what the tempo is of your drum loop, what we could do now is place it into musical mode. We could do this in the pool, or we could choose to just do it. So we'll come here. I'll just delete these. So now, another method of putting it into musical mode is just to come right here and click musical mode. So now that these are in musical mode and Cubase knows what the tempo of the original loops are, these will play back at the same tempo. So if I change the tempo from 120, let's say to 100, so one's at 96, one's at 140, it's just going to play back slower. So we can change the tempo, and these loops would all play back perfectly in tempo. And other audio files I add when I have kind of align beats to tempo, when I come over here. So if I wanted to add that little drum part, now once this is activated, we could just automatically, when it's dropped in, it will automatically be placed into musical mode. So if we wanted to listen to each of these, so that's how you do it. So just make sure that you kind of know what the original tempo is and that you place it into musical mode. So we could do this. You could select all the events here, place into musical mode from the info line, or if you go to the pool, which is Control or Command plus the letter P, you could see the original tempos here and place those into musical mode. Once it's in musical mode, it follows the project tempo. So even if I come here and let's add a tempo track and we activate our tempo track and I draw in just some different tempo changes here, we can now have the loops slow down, speed up. and have it follow the tempo map, just like that. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Okay, Tiago asks, thanks for the answer about auto-quantized velocities. Another question, when I have a MIDI part created, how can I improve score readability, such as enharmonics, rests, etc.? Okay. Okay, so let me just open up an example of something that we run into a lot with scores. Let me find one project. See if I have it open in my recent list. Okay, here it is. So a lot of times when we play musical parts in, and we want to look at it, you know, our MIDI performance in notation, we may run into stuff like, let's come here to this Rhodes part. So I'll just kind of listen to this Rhodes and we'll solo it and put the click track on. So we'll just say, okay. So I'll put the click track on. So we can say this feels, you know, there's like the little rolled chords occasionally. So if we wanted to kind of notate that in a way, so when we look at this in our MIDI editor, we can see that these notes, you know, technically are ahead of the beat here, ahead of the beat, ahead of the beat. Some may fall behind. We may have kind of those rolled chords that we kind of see in here. So when you look at this in a notation example, we'll come over here. So this is kind of exactly like how it's being notated, but this isn't necessarily what you would want to give to a musician. So when you come over here, I'm just going to double click to the left, and I think I'm in the key of A flat in this example, and I want to go to my polyphonic settings. I want to set this to a split, and we'll say C3. All right, so now we have some stuff kind of cleaned up, but when we go to our staff settings here and go to main, one of the things that we can do that's very important to kind of get this so that it's not notating it perfectly correct in the eyes of the computer, but how it would look, how we would pass it on to a musician. Like I say, the smallest note I intended, we're going to do a quantize of the appearance of the notation. Like I say, the smallest rest I intended was a quarter note rest, and maybe I was swinging a little bit. I'll turn on these little interpretive flags, and when I hit apply, we can see what this looks like here. This could be very hard for a musician to read. You don't want to give this to a chart to musician, but now we could just kind of clean it up very easily using our different display quantizing. Now if you needed to do enharmonic shifts, you know, as soon as you are here, you could just click on this icon here. So say, okay, let's zoom in. I'm just going to hold down Control or Command, and I want to do an enharmonic shift for this particular note. We would just, you'll see like this little icon here. Let me just, zoomed in. So right here, and then you could just choose to do different enharmonic shifts, and you can see how like the rests can be interpreted as well. So again, you can just come over here and, you know, play around with the display quantize settings, and you can see that you can just kind of clean up that very easily and have very legible notation without having to have one part that is the playback and another part that is designed for the print out. So there's lots of programs where people use two separate parts One is what is printed, one is what's played back. Here we could just quantize the appearance so that we could have one part and we look at it, this hasn't quantized or moved any of the notes. So if we look at this in our key editor, the notes would still be early or late, but it's notated more accurately how a musician would want to read it. All right, so we see Cubase Mixing joining us. All right, Leho26 asks, question, hi, how can I export a 2-bar MIDI clip into a single file? Thank you. All right, so let me open up a different project. So I'm not sure if you want to turn it into audio or MIDI, but let's say if I have this clip here, so we could activate the project. Okay, so I have this. I'm going to solo this. So let's say this is longer than 2 bars, but if I wanted this MIDI event to be separate, I'm going to solo it. And then we choose export MIDI file. So we'll just say piano. I'll just call it. Okay, so, and now since that is soloed, when we go to, we'll go to import a MIDI file. It says you want to create a new project, we'll say create. We'll come here to the desktop. Here's our file we just created. And let me just check that one more time. Make sure I had the right track soloed. So again, it's solo this. I'll unchoose export locator range. Sorry about that. All right, so now we import the MIDI file again. Put it into a new project. And then we open this up, and here is the MIDI data just there. So if you wanted to export it as MIDI, if you wanted to export it as audio, all you'd have to do is we'll select the particular event here. And then if you go to edit to render in place, you'll see your render settings. And we say let's go to channel settings, and now we could have it as an audio file directly underneath here. So if you want to export it as MIDI, just just want to do it track by track, just come over here, solo the track, export the MIDI file. Or if you wanted to turn it into audio, just simply do a render in place. It's probably the easiest way. Okay. Okay, so Yazian asks, could you make for us a stereo tool tutorial inside of Cubase? So if you wanted to kind of like play with different stereo width, so let's go take a look at that. I'll open up a project. So I'm not sure what you want from the stereo tool, but if you wanted to kind of manipulate your mix to make it sound wider, we'll show you that. So let's go ahead and take this project here. So I'm going to take my master bus here. So let's come over here to like the imager plugin. We have a multi-band imager. So if I wanted to have like my high frequencies wider, my low end to be very kind of narrow. And you can see kind of the phase meter here kind of showing. So without it on. So go ahead and turn it off. We have drums coming in, we'll turn it on. And now turn it on. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to see, but you know, play around with the imager plugin, and that way you could take different frequency ranges and make those sound wider. So a lot of times you may not want the low end to sound wider, but other frequencies too, and that will make sense for you. All right, so we see Home Studio World just saying hi to everyone from Jordan. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so Yazian just says my output does not work sometimes, you know, so make sure like as you're doing projects that, you know, one is just to check like routing on track. So here I have this going to my stereo out, and on my stereo out, when we go to the studio menu and we go to audio connections, so if you're using the control room, you could, like I use a control room in Cubase Pro, we could see the mix output here, but make sure that if you're not using a control room that your inputs and outputs are defined directly here and that those are set up correctly, and make sure that the routing for the tracks are going out to outputs where those outputs are defined to physical connections on your audio interface. All right, so we see from Learn with Steven. Hi, Greg and team. Quick question. Can I assign a portion of a project to a different BPM, say an intro at 80 BPM and then the rest at 105, for example? So yeah, there's a couple ways of doing this. One is just using a tempo track. So let's say I'm here and I want to add a tempo track. Once we have a tempo track, you know, so Cubase by default will just play back one static tempo. When we activate a tempo track, we could say, I want this value here to be 80. And let's say, okay, at a certain point in the song, I want the tempo to speed up. Now, we can see that we may want it to not do a gradual ramp. If we just kind of slide this over, we could switch this from step to ramp. So I'm going to undo that last move. I'm going to put it into step. And now I can say at this point, switch tempo from 80 to, and as we look at it, we can say 140. So we could put in different tempo values right here. If you have something like, you know, a lighter version of Cubase where you don't have a tempo track, if you hit Command or Control T, you'll see the tempo editor. And then you can say right here, I want this to go to this tempo right here. It's a different window. And you could also put in different time signatures above that right there. So if you don't have a tempo track, hit Control or Command plus the letter T, like as in tempo, and then you could go to the tempo track editor right there. All right, wonderful to see Jeff Sabelski from Chico, California. Glad you can make it today. All right, so Jeff Sabelski says he likes the routing tab in the inspector. Cubase 13 getting used to some new things. All right, we see Roger Cabo on. All right, so we see Dave Fox asks, hi Greg, is it possible to get Cubase to automatically apply, let me clear my throat, to apply fixed lengths to notes to match the length quantize setting when recording a MIDI keyboard input? Okay. So I'm not sure if it's automatic. Let's just give it a try. All right, so let's come over. Okay, so let's say my quantize value here is set to quarter notes, and I want it to do a quick auto quantize. Okay, so now I played in faster and quarter notes. It's going to quantize that, but I don't think that we could do kind of real-time quantize on the input, but let's... Yeah, so I don't think it's going to be on input unless you're doing step entry. So I think it's going to be kind of a two-step process. So let's come over here, and if we did step entry, and I put in, so as we do this in step entry, my value is set to quarter, that we can turn this off. So, but as we do step entry, the length is taken into account, but the real-time quantize won't take the length. You'll have to apply it afterwards, I'm pretty sure. All right, so we see Leho26 says, Greg, thank you for answering. His second question is it possible to randomize the pitch of MIDI notes according to the root key tonality and along the chords placed on the chord track? Okay, so let's say I have very much a G major in our chord track here, and I'll just kind of come over and let's just play something not in G major. So I'll just record something in F. All right, so we have different chords here. So if we want to randomize the chords, and I'm going to place this in where we have our chord track here. Okay, so let's look at it, and we'll open up our global tracks here so we can see our chord track. Okay, so if we want to randomize notes within the chord track, let's go to the MIDI logical editor. Let's get set up. So we want to transform. Type is equal to note. And we'll say pitch. Okay, so if we come over here, all right, so the first thing we could do is, let's say we're in G major, that's determined here. If we go to the scale assistant, we can just come over here and we could say we're going to use the chord track, or we could define this. So we'll say, okay, now I want to quantize pitches, and that will do, but it's not necessarily random. But if I randomize the pitches, so let's go back to our chord, our logical editor, and we're going to say, let's pitch, we're going to set the relatively random values. We'll say -6 plus 6. Okay, so now we can randomize the notes, and then we could quantize the pitch within the scale. So it's like kind of a two-step process. So we could apply this to randomize the notes and then quantize the pitches to within the scale that's matching the chords. So again, we want to take the notes here, randomize them, and then quantize the random pitches to follow the chord track. So let me know if that's helpful for you. So I think it's a two-step process. All right. All right, so we have DJ Mixes saying hi from Switzerland. We have Uno Mementos saying hi to Jeff Sabelski. All right, Tox Malloy. Hi, Greg. I'm facing a situation where when I import a wave beat to record on, it has silence at the front, and so it shifts the time. Okay, so let's say if I have something like, all right, so I'm going to, let's say if we have something like a file like this that, okay, so here we have silence. Okay, so it says I import a wave beat to record on. It has silence at the front, so it shifts the time. All right, so if it has even just like a little bit of silence here and it's kind of off of the grid, what I would do is, there's a couple different approaches. Probably the easiest way. So if this was like 2 bars and I drag it across, we can see that's not aligned to the grid. I would probably choose to, truncate the beginning of the part and align that. And you could, if you don't know exactly kind of what the tempo is, I would switch to the time warp tool and put it into warp grid. And then you can say, okay, this beat is 2 measures long. You could now just kind of grab and say this is where measure 2 ends, and then you have the tempo from the original loop that's fitting, and then duplicate that. So let me know if that's helpful, but try truncating the very beginning of the note. And you could also just come over here if you want to use the range tool, say, okay, this is what I want to use. Hit Shift plus X. That will split the range. You could then delete that and get that to be aligned to the grid. And if it's not aligned to the grid, switch to the warp grid, and then basically what you do is you move the measures to match the events. Okay, so wonderful to see Madge Deepers. Great to see you back on. Checking in from a very wet United Kingdom. All right, so we have Learn with Steven. Just says, thank you, Greg. It's Cubase 13 Pro. I believe that was with the tempo track. How do tempo changes? All right, Crappy Blonde asks, hey, Greg, sorry for the following question. I've been commissioned to work on a remix of an old song that's in 3/4 and a loose tempo of 171 BPM. How could I go about quantizing it and changing it to 4/4 for a remix? Okay, so if you had a song, I don't think I have any. See if I have 3/4 song. So, taking a song from 3/4 to 4/4, may kind of lose the whole feel of the song. So, you could do it, but obviously the entire feel of the song is going to change. Let me see if. I'll just see if I can make something in 3/4 quickly here. All right, so let me change my meter here to 3/4. All right, so let's say if I want. Stop the click, sorry. All right, so let's say if we want to come over here, let's say, okay. All right, so now we have something that's like in 3/4 time, and as we're kind of playing along with it, I'll just quantize this. So, you know, if we make this into 4/4, it's, you know, you could have a 4/4 meter, but it may not work. So I would take the remix and still do it in 3/4. You know, so if you wanted to come and let's just add an instrument track here, we'll do a Howling Sonic, and let's just say we're doing a quick remix of this. I think taking it from 3/4 to 4/4 is going to change the song pretty radically. But if we just kind of, you know, again, come here and say, okay, we want, you know, so if we have something kind of light feeling, kind of in 3/4, that we could, you know, so if I wanted to come, let's just paste this in. Let's go to drum editor. Let's find a quick. So if I was doing kind of a remix of this and we are in 3/4, let's put this to quarter notes. And then even if it's kind of a more traditional waltz, you know, you could, you know, at this point you could have different remix elements. Now, if it's to the point where like the tempo is kind of fluctuating a little bit for your taste, what you could do is, you know, define the original tempo if it's kind of like 171-ish, but the original track is fluctuating as a natural recording. So we'll come over here. Let's take so let's say as we're listening to this and the tempo is fluctuating and we want it to be more steady tempo wise, I would do this. So go select the event and go to the tempo detection. And then it places your meter here at 1/4 because it's figuring out what the beats are. So at this point in the song, I would just type in 3/4. This song is in 4/4 in common time. So place it into 4/4. And if you wanted this to be more regulated and steady, so it's not fluctuating, you could select the original file from the remix, go to your audio menu, to advanced, and we can say set definition from tempo, and that's going to write all these tempo events into the file. And now we get, instead of the tempo fluctuating, I'm just going to turn this off. So we're roughly like 160. So I'm going to come here, type in 160. Maybe 170. So now it's playing back a perfectly even tempo. So if you want to take the original, you know, 3/4 track at 171, I would do a tempo detection. And if you need it to be kind of more steady, do that. But I probably would still keep it in 3/4. And when you go to the signature track, just change it to 3/4. So I don't know many songs that would survive kind of 3/4 to 4/4. It could work, but I would, you know, concentrate more on the tempo of that. So let me know if that's helpful at all. All right, so I see kind of foreign language I can't read. Sorry. I don't know if it's possible to use Google Translate, maybe to ask the question. All right, Dave Fox asks, Okay, so we see, hi Greg, is it possible to set the mix console to display the tracks in opposite order of how they're shown on a project window? For example, left to right, track 3, 2, 1. So currently they're going to be in order of the mix console and the tracks. So at this point, there isn't a way to reverse the mix console. You know, most people want kind of that correlation between tracks in the mix console, you know, to correlate and not be the opposite. I think that would be confusing for a lot of people. So as we add tracks and we select our tracks, we can have that direct correlation going top down and left to right in the mix console so that it's perfectly in sync. All right, so I think we just have a quick question. Can you demonstrate how to do mastering? I think this was the question that was asked in kind of the foreign language I couldn't read. All right, so there's a number of ways. So if I was going to do it in Cubase, you know, we could take our file here. So let's say we want to, I'll just take off my tempo changes. So say, and if I wanted to do processing inside of Cubase, so take my metronome off and I wanted to do processing just on this. What you could do is, and a lot of these you could do just directly in the channel strip. So if you want to, so I can go to the EQ. And let's put like a stereo enhancer on. So let's go to the Imager plugin that we looked at earlier. And we could come over, let's put on different EQs, different compressors. And if we wanted to run like a limiter, so you could do different processing like that, or if you wanted to be kind of more, if you're doing like a full album project, so you could do, some people will consider mastering kind of just doing processing on a particular track. Some people will use a dedicated tool, such as Wavelab 12, which is our kind of mastering solution. And this will give you all sorts of wonderful mastering tools and delivery scenarios. So if you want to burn CDs, if you want to put metadata, you want to deliver to multiple files simultaneously, we could just come over here and see kind of a full-fledged mastering solution that's available. So if you wanted to come over and do like normalizing of your different audio files, we could just say, okay, I want to do, you know, visual analysis of clips, you know, so this would give us all sorts of, this is kind of a dedicated mastering and final delivery. Or if you wanted to do just processing, you could do that inside of Cubase as well. So it really can depend on what your definition of mastering is. Thank you for the translation from the Professor WM. All right, so we see from Home Studio World, says, thanks, Greg. I noticed that exporting different MIDI tracks as a single MIDI file, when you're drag it again to Cubase, it'll return again to separate MIDI tracks. So if we have a MIDI file, so let's look at something. So we look at this. You know, a MIDI file will contain all of the different tracks. So because it's just what the nature of a MIDI file is. So if I exported this as a MIDI file, all of the different tracks would be included. If we solo a particular track, it's only going to be this one track that's included, or only the solo tracks that are included with that. So it's not like they're separate files, kind of like doing when we do an audio, like a batch export, we have independent audio files. MIDI files aren't set up that way. So when you go, if we save this as a MIDI file, it would import exactly like this with all the tracks. And if we only wanted one track, we would just solo. And then as we exported the MIDI file, only the solo track would be contained. So let me know if that makes sense. See, Daniel says, deeply enjoying this free knowledge. Thank you. I'm trying to ask no more than one question per hour. You could ask as many questions as you want. So. All right, DJ Mixes says, hi, Greg. You know your way around Yamaha. Use Yamaha AG03 Mark II W Mixer and Cubase 13 Pro. After a while, 10 minutes, it starts to distort the sound at the output. What is the problem? Check to see if sometimes if something goes for like 10 minutes, that could be kind of indicative of maybe like a USB power. So when you're doing that, where you're connected to, make sure one that you're connected. If you're connected into a hub, see if you connect it directly to the computer, if that makes a difference. Also try going into your BIOS, your computer's BIOS, and make sure that the USB port isn't on like a energy saving mode or something like that. So, check to make sure that check to make sure that there's nothing in the USB bus power that's being kind of throttled or restricted. Tim K suggests to bridge from 3/4 time to 4/4 time. Try a fast 6/8. That could work as well. It's a good suggestion. All right, so we have question number 3 from Leo26. Is it possible to save chords from chord pads or chord track in a MIDI library for later use? So once you get to the chord pads here, if we create your own chords, so let's say I come here, we can now save this as a preset. So at this point, if we just click on Save Preset, we'll call this May 21st, 2024. And let me go ahead and, so we'll go to Arena Chords. Okay, we have that. And now we could just come over here to May 21st, 2024. And then there's our preset. And then once we have this set up, we can drag these to and from our particular 2 chord tracks. So if we have a chord track, we can just drag these. So you can save the chord pads as presets and just kind of call them up as you see fit. So you'll just see right here, just save preset in the chord pads. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we see John Costigan checking in from Kenosha, Wisconsin. It says he's tardy but present. We're just happy to always have you on, John. Casting your positivity. All right, so we see from Vishnu from India. His question is, how can we easily rename events in the arranger track? Okay, so let's come over here. Let's add an arranger track. Okay, so as we do this, we're going to add, so it'll be like A, B, C, D, E, F, G by default. So if you hold down the Alt or Option key, double click, we can say intro, Alt or Option, double click, verse 1, Alt or Option, double click, pre-chorus, chorus. So Alt or Option, double click, so pre-chorus, and etc. So Alt or Option, double click, and then you could see that the events will just be renamed, just like we see it reflected here as well. So let me know if that makes sense for you. So just Alt or Option and double click here in the bottom area, type in the name, and then the arranger events are named. Great to see you on, Vishnu. Glad you could join us today. All right, Spittoon Dude says, add an effect on a specific part on an audio track, preferably a vocal. Okay. So let's come to this. Let's add on our vocal track, maybe like a quick delay throw. All right. All right, I'll just revert. What did you say? You wished it all away. All right, so we're going to just find a quick little spot. Maybe like up here we'll do delays. All right, so where she says day. So I'm going to take that. I'm just going to select the little range I want it to fall in. All right, and I'm just going to turn off my J here. So I'm going to select just so we could start right on the word day, and I want it to last to here. So what we're going to do is go to Audio menu, Plugins, and we can see your plugin collection. Let's just add a mono delay. On that, I want it to be, let's say, maybe a dotted quarter delay. So now as we listen to it, so you can also just access this. So if you want to select a region, hit the F7 key, which will open up the direct offline processing, and then you could just choose to do effects. So let's say I wanted to do maybe like an AM radio voice here. I would come over here to EQ. Let's go to Studio EQ, and let's look for telephone voice. So now as we do this, we have our, I wanted that to be filtered through like an EQ. Now even after saving it, I can say, oh, I want the Studio EQ to go first, or I wanted to add a third process, whatever we wanted to do. Even after saving the project, we could still come back and just say I want the telephone voice, but I don't want the delay, and I could remove just that one particular process completely independently. So again, to do that, just come over, select the region that you want, or if you want it to be the whole file, you could hit the F7 key, And then you could choose different processes. So if you wanted to, reverse the words, you could do that as well, just on your selection. Or run it through different plugins, and those could be undone at any time, 10 minutes later, 10 seconds later, 10 years later. The original file is always preserved for you. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we see from Crappy Blonde, just says it's an existing recording of a big band in audio, though not MIDI. So, all right, so I think if you just do like the tempo detection, that would get you probably 90% there. But doing, switching it to 3/4, if I heard the original song, I might be able to come up with some musical suggestions, but it could be tricky switching meters like that. All right, so we see Sway TV and Recording Studio says, hi, thanks for helping us. You're welcome. See, Crappy Blonde says, thank you very much, Greg. Yeah, the band will be playing live once it's set in 4/4, so the waltz has to be shuffled into more of a gallop of 4/4 to make it a dance song for their performance. So, yeah, I mean, if you have like an MP3 or something that you could share, and maybe to Club Cubase at Steinberg.de, if I heard it, I might be able to come up with some other ideas if that doesn't, and I could share it with you privately, or we could show it on the next live stream if that makes sense and doesn't violate any copyright. All right, DL White asks, hi Greg from Fort Worth. When I'm using MIDI drums, how can I disassociate a copied loop part from the other copies of it in order to have a variation on different verses, change the hi-hat pattern? Here, I'll just... All right, so let's say I'm doing just like generic drum beats, and I want like variations in like on my verse and chorus. So we'll just come here. So let's say I want to, we'll just program a quick beat. All right, so let's say here I want to have hi-hats. All right, so let's say I've copied this a number of times, okay? And now I want to do like a variation starting here. So I'll copy this. And now I want to do variation on this one. and I'll just take it out of solo. So here I want to do like 16th note hi-hats. So we'll choose 16th notes here. All right, and let me just add a couple other things in variation here. So I just kind of copy that and we'll do variations. So I could kind of start with that variation, come over here, say this is going to be my verse, and now I wanted to just copy that, and then we could just come over here, and we go back into the verse. So you could do stuff like that, so just kind of easily, make copies. And if you know exactly kind of how many you want to do, one of the other things you could do is, let's say I have my variation here, I'll delete these. Let's say we have our kind of coarse version. If I hit Control K, I could say let's copy this 3 more times. And if we do this, so we hit Command or Control plus the letter K, we could do these as shared copies. So now what this will allow me to do is if I come here and say, now I want to make a change on this one shared copy. So let's say, okay, I want my kick to be on 4 on the floor kind of deal. For this is now going to apply these changes I made in this one to all the other shared copies. So you could do kind of shared copies, but take one beat and do like a variation just to make it kind of more interesting so it's not playing back the same thing constantly. So let me know if that's helpful for you, DL White. Okay, so we see from Daniel, a very beginner question. What would be the 20% that most are important to focus on so I'm capable of getting 80% finished song? So far, I know to add an instrument, to add some notes in the scale, adjust volume in the mixer, maybe add default reverb. If it's important, I want to make Latin rhythmic music like kazamba and salsa. So, just, start with, okay, I want to make sure, what I would do if I was, learning Cubase and kind of wanting to do a song, I would start with, okay, I want to get the drums done now. So I want a basic drum pattern I could build on. Then I want to maybe add chords, play around with the chord track. So let's say if I'm here, I have this going on. So let's say I built a quick drum pattern here. And now I want to try out different chords. So I'm going to come over here. And as we do this, so we're going to have this play through our monitor track. So I'm going to say, okay, let's just build. Okay, so I want it to be key of F. And then I want it to go to our next chord is D minor, and try different. All right, so I have kind of a piano sound. So I have drums and I have maybe a chord progression. So let's add 2 more measures to this. All right. And let's say, okay, we want to go from, and let's go to like B flat major, add that, and let's say a C chord. So at this point, we could just kind of, we have kind of a foundation for a song. We know if we like the chords. And we can say, okay, maybe I want this to be a B flat with a D and a bass. See how that sounds. All right, and if I like that, I can say, okay, let's just repeat that. So I'm gonna take this and this will be our verse. So we'll come here, select with the range tool, hold down my Alt or Option key. And then I can say, okay, maybe I want to take these particular chords when we go in this part. Okay, I want this to translate. I want to modulate that down. And, kind of build your song from there. So, start with drums, come up with chords, and then fill in parts. Okay, now I know what the chords are. I want to play a bass part. Now I want to do a guitar part. I want to record other things. But start with kind of the foundations of the songs and build up from there. And I think that would be a great place to start. All right, let me get my computer to wake up here. My questions on. All right, so we see John Ferngrove says, hi, I'm new here, but definitely paying attention. So, yeah, just ask any questions that you need to see. All right, so we have a question from Acoustics. It says, question, how do I save my projects properly? I've had mixed down and audio files get saved to a different location and corrupts my projects. Thanks. Okay, so once we do this, so when we do a new project, think of every time you do a new project, that ideally you want it to be in a new folder. So I'm going to choose create empty, and then when it does that, you'll see just this little setting. If you don't have this setting, so we'll say new project, you want to prompt for project location. So ideally, when you start off, we want every project into its own unique folder. So now as we record audio, it's going to go into the project folder. Now, if you have kind of messed up and you maybe have files in different folders, or you use the same folder for multiple projects, what you could do is choose to do a backup project. And what this will ask you for is to create a new folder, and it's going to copy all the files used in the project. And so we need to create a new folder, and it's going to copy all of the files, and you could choose to minimize audio files, like the direct offline processing where we added the effect earlier a couple minutes ago. If we wanted to get rid of the origin files for that, we can remove unused files. We can choose not to back up video or mixdown folder. So this is, if you've messed up and your projects or audio files are scattered, this will then copy them all into a brand new folder where everything is consolidated. When you do an audio mixdown, what you want to do is, you see your audio mixdown, we could choose to see a path. And if you had set this path to a different location before, it will generally kind of keep that path for you. So what you want to do, let's say we come over here, we have our export audio mixdown, choose a path, but you could also, if you just click right here, every project can contain a project mixdown folder. So within the project folder, you'll have an audio folder where all of your audio files, you'll have the .cpr project, that's where that's going to be saved to by default. And if you choose the project mixdown folder, when you do a mixdown, it will be automatically placed into a new folder when you do a mixdown that is called mixdown. So that's an easy way to do it, but you could choose a path here if you wanted to have the exported files go to a different location. So if you're kind of messed up, do a backup project, and then you could choose the path of where the exported files will get written to. All right, Jeff Sabelski says, I'm installing Windows 10 Pro, so are there any issues with our software with Windows 11? Everything works great with Windows 11. So, but make sure, it could be like a third-party plugin may not be working. I'm still running Cubase 10 Pro. I don't really, on my personal studio machine, I'm running Windows 10 Pro. I don't really feel the need to jump up to Windows 11. If my next computer comes with Windows 11, I'll happily use it, but I don't see any like huge difference for me to jump up. So if it's working for you, you're probably fine. Always wonderful to see Val checking in from Vienna. Glad you could make it today. All right, Jovanovic 3D says, thanks, Greg, for help. Cubase is really awesome. By the way, I wonder, what is your opinion about AI integration into DAW, as if generic AI music is not enough? I think, like when we do coming up with harmonies and, for vocals based on chord track and coming up with chord suggestions, one could argue that that's kind of AI that's working for you. I think that is, when it saves you time and helps you out in a musical situation, I think it's really good. What I find personally not interesting is, taking a song that's generated by AI and having it kind of, come up with something entirely new that's kind of very generic. I think obviously the tools are getting better and the results are all good, but I think the interesting thing is, people are like, wow, I could do all this amazing stuff free, but, do you actually own the copyright to the material, or if you actually release something, are you going to be paying the software company that came up with the AI algorithm? If you got lucky and made a gazillion dollars on a hit single, would you forfeit all that money because you used an AI tool? So for me, I would try to make my music in a way that it couldn't be replaced by AI. It's kind of like I still like typing a word, like, typing a document and making sure I spelled all the words correctly. So stuff like that. So at times I would try to make my music so that it couldn't be replaced by AI, if that makes sense. So that would be the bar I would go for if you're worried about it. But so I think when it solves problem, like, exporting audio redundant tasks and maybe stuff that's going on in spectral layers with its algorithms for, being able to, filter out different things and, be able to do unmixing, that's a wonderful resource as well. All right, so we see Pertti Kominen also checking in from Finland. All right, so we see DL White asks, how can I select every instance of a MIDI note in a part and change the velocities of every other note, say at 190, like on a hi-hat or shaker? All right, so let's take a look. Let's say if we are here and we look at my hi-hat. All right, so let's say they're all roughly the same. So let's say I want every other hi-hat here to change velocities. So let's go to our logical editor, and I think there's even presets. One of the presets that does this. Let's go to MIDI to logical editor, but if you want this to be really cool, so I'm going to choose to transform. We're going to say type is equal to note. We could do, okay, I wanted this only to be on F#1 if you wanted to. But I'm going to just do based on the selected note. So we can see that these are all roughly the same velocity. And then we're going to say, and we want to say, okay, let's go to, and we want at the top, we're going to choose context or last event. I'm going to say every other event. And here we're going to say 2. All right, and then what do we, so now if we choose this, we could select every other event. But what we want to do is to take the velocity and let's subtract 30. So right now we look at these notes, all the velocity is the same. I want to now come over and we're going to take our notes, and if I have notes selected, that will, I don't have to define a pitch. And we just want to say every other event. So we say last event, every other event, value 1, we want to set to 2. And we're going to say velocity, we're going to subtract 30. So let me just make sure I did that right. I'll just get rid of these notes here quickly. All right, let me just check. I have the condition set up. Okay, I'm sorry, we're going to choose every other event and then event counter 2. My apologies. So now if I have this on select, it's going to select every other event and choose transform. So now every other event, so we're going to say type is equal to notes, the last event, and we're going to say every other event, event counter 2, and then we're going to take our velocity and subtract 30. So you could do stuff like that. So let me know if that's helpful. So again, type is equal to note, last event, every other event, event counter, choose 2, and then on the action target, and this is when we choose transform, you want to choose velocity if you want to subtract, and then you could put the value that you want to subtract it by. All right, so we see, will there be a Cubase in Linux anytime? So nothing has been announced. I think the vast majority of the market is going to be on Mac and Windows. So, but nothing has been announced with that. So I saw an email from Crappy Blonde. I'll check it out after the live stream. Thanks for sending it. All right, sorry, my chat field just jumped. Okay, sorry, just finding my spot. Okay, so we have a question on MIDI arpeggiator. Greg, is it possible to play 4 different variations in random order for a MIDI track, for bass, for example? All right, so let's come over. Let's say we have... All right, so let's say if we go to our MIDI inserts, then we have an arpeggi. So we'll come over here. All right, so the arpeggiator is kind of based on, like, I'm playing the chords and it's going to arpeggiate the notes. When I play a C major chord, it's going to arpeggiate those chords. But let's kind of use 2 different MIDI effects at once. So let's come over here. And let's go to MIDI modifiers. So after that, and we may have to change the order of this, but let's say, okay, now I want to do MIDI modifiers and I want to randomize, let's say to scale. So we can set a random target of pitch and match to pitch. So when we use 2 of them together, we could, all right, so let's come over here. Let's say, okay, let's go an octave up, an octave down. So now we could just randomize the particular and then if we wanted to randomize the velocity, so we could kind of use, 2 different MIDI plugins simultaneously to kind of get randomness with it. So if you wanted to come over here, we get, and let's see if we do the arpeggi after. So we could take, so you could do, running kind of multiple MIDI modifiers, and let's say, okay, let's put a MIDI echo on, and as we do this, I want to change the pitch offset to 0. So you could have all sorts of, different MIDI, different MIDI plugins that are kind of running concurrently to get random results as well. So experiment with that. All right. Okay, reading through questions. All right. All right, so wonderful to see Mark Rabin back from Montana. And we see Stella says, lick the like. So everyone say woof to Stella, which is Mark's dog, if you're not familiar. It's a very loyal attendee, Stella. So everyone send virtual treats to Stella. All right, so we see Crappy Blonde says, sorry, I didn't get the email address I should send it to. So I think I got it, but it's clubcubase@steinberg.de. Clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so we see Whiplash saying, hi from New Jersey. Thank you for the amazing dedication to our community. I'm just glad to be able to help people realize their creativity. Okay, reading through comments. See, the Professor WM is, I think latency is the only argument for Mac as a Windows sound system. Yes, also ASIO is pretty weak. So I think if you actually look at the technical things, you'll see that core audio is basically very, 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 very similar to ASIO. So I think ASIO is pretty strong for working with low latency material. So. Wonderful to see Lawrence Koch from Barn Door Recording in Rhode Island. So usually it's not on Tuesdays, usually on Fridays. We're glad you can make it today. See, Daniel says, thank you. I didn't know you could use chord track like that. I thought it was only for reference. Yes, there's lots of great stuff you can do, especially coming up with initial song ideas. All right, wonderful to see Brian Sawyer Sr. from Beulahville, North Carolina. See, JVI says, bonsoir. Greg just tuned in. Thanks for these hangouts, and thanks to Steinberg to these hangouts. You're welcome. I'm glad that people like them. All right, so we see Thrill Punk says, hi, Greg. Just wanted to thank you for the tip about group tracks in the previous stream. We've been able to set up a fully controllable effects chain bouncing dry going into a reverb. That's great. Thanks for letting me know. All right, we see Mark Rabin's son is coming to visit, and he's in an hour on an airplane, and Stella's very excited. All right, wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas, outside of Dallas area, Dallas-Fort Worth. All right, so we see Daniel just says, please stop deleting my questions. So I don't think, I haven't seen any questions are deleted, but maybe if they're over 200 characters, it may not show. So, but I haven't seen any that were deleted. I see, I know the moderators can delete something, and usually it shows like, deleted by moderator, but I haven't seen anything like that. So it might be a YouTube thing. Okay, reading through comments. All right, wonderful to see Gareth on. All right, Paul Claridge says, hello, Greg. A shortcut key to remove overlaps on a track, MIDI and audio. Somehow on my project, I had 3 overlaps by accident on all tracks. We had to click the little arrow and remove each event. All right, so let's say if we have so check to see if you have the preference enabled. So if you go to editing, that you have delete overlaps turned on. So you could, and so now if we come over and let's grab a couple audio files here. So if we have our audio files kind of like this, and I drag them over, the underlying audio will be deleted. So it's usually just, so now when I come over here, those files are gone. They're still kind of present as we do this. But it's usually, Paul, when you come over here, just make sure that you have that particular editing mode on. And again, it's under Preferences, Editing, and that you have Delete Overlaps. If that's unchecked, now when we do this, we can see that we see these diagonal lines indicating that there's audio that's stacked on top of each other. But just to activate the delete overlaps, again, go to Preferences, Editing, Delete Overlaps, and then as you work, it will just delete any of the overlaps like so. See, Throwpunk just says, to me, the whole AI thing is less relevant. They can't take the direct experience of actually playing music. That's a personal interaction with Cubase. Makes amazing to do in a moment. That's a good point. Michael is happy to see Gareth on. Okay, my chat field jumped. Get back to where I was. All right. All right, we see Mark Rabin's been granted 1 gallon of Scoopy's Black Diamond ice cream from Michael Teams. And Gareth has been granted 1 gallon of Golden Opulence Sundae ice cream. DL White asks, hi Greg, is there a functional advantage of using the drum editor versus MIDI editor? So, I think that there are some advantages. So one, like when you look at our drums, let me just come here. I think that one of the big things is you could select and just see the hi-hats, because for me, velocities are so essential on working with, drums. So when we select a particular lane here, we can see only the velocities. If we want to see kind of the key editor here, at this point, I see all of the velocities and not just for, just the snare or the kick. Also, some other great things that you have with the drum editor is the ability to just see what the name is in these drum maps. If you're using Groove Agent, we can automatically just come right here. We'll see under the routing tab in 13. We could just see we could import the drum map from Groove Agent. So we could just kind of look at it and see all the different sounds. When we want to draw in like velocities, so let's say I want to come over here and say, okay, I want this to be in quarter notes. As I kind of draw in, I could choose different values as we want to draw in. So here I want to put 16th notes, I want to put half notes as we're kind of building different drum patterns. So, and if we want to get like really extreme, I could say, okay, I want this to, if we create a new MIDI track, we showed this on the last live stream. Okay, so just come here, add a MIDI track. All right. And if we come over here to our drum map setup, we can add a new drum map. And then we'll select our new drum map that we've made. And as we would double click, let's just create an event here. We double click here. If we have multiple destinations, I could say I want the kick coming out of this instrument, the snare coming out of a different instrument, the hi-hat from a sampler track. So, and once we're here, you say, okay, I want to paint in, different rhythmic values for those. So there's a lot of great stuff that advantages with the drum editor that I think working in a piano roll, you're kind of looking at more kind of a musical harmony and a harmonic basis can make more sense. Whereas the drum editor, is just kind of a classic way of making beats very fast. See, Stella's ears perked up when I said her name. That's so great to hear. Stella's a beautiful dog. All right, Terry Gray from Minneapolis asks, hey Greg, I just bought a new MacBook. Congratulations. I already have Nuendo installed on my Mac Studio. Can I install it on my laptop as well? So yeah, once you just install it, and when you go to the Steinberg Activation Manager, you could have your Nuendo 12 or 13 license installed in up to 3 different computers. So if you want to run on your Mac Studio, your MacBook Pro, and one at work, you could have 3 different licenses that could be available for you to use. So just install it, go to the Activation Manager, and then activate it. And again, you could run it on 3 separate computers. Congratulations on your new MacBook. All right, so you just see from Daniel that he just emailed a question, so I thought it came in. So let's see if we could get to it now. Let me look at my phone quickly. So we can get it done tonight. All right, so we see from Daniel, it says, if I understand you correctly, it's not necessary to learn new Cubase features to complete a song. Also, can a song be good without mixing or mastering for now? So, generally, it could really depend on what your song is. Sometimes, songs don't have to be super high quality. There's a lot of really, to me, it's about communicating passion. So, if I would rather have a vocal that is full of passion, that maybe you hear their feet squeaking on, their feet on the floor and it's technically a mistake, but the vocal has passion. I would take the vocal with passion over something that's super squeaky clean that didn't have passion. So so it doesn't, just kind of get something done, and I think, and even with, our most, the most high-end film composers, you ask them, it's like, I remember talking with Hans Zimmer once, and it's a question I ask a lot of composers is like, how do you know when you're done? And he's like, when the director comes and says, give me my music, it's over. Because otherwise you could just kind of keep going on forever. But, give yourself a set amount of time. One of my friends who's, been fortunate to work with Paul McCartney in a lot of records, he says, Paul will just sit down. It's like, okay, I'm going to write a song and record it in 2 hours, and I'm just going to get something done. If it's good, it's great. If it's not, I just did this. But give yourself a deadline and just get something done. Don't worry about what other people think about it. There's lots of songs that were released, was a demo that got released and was very successful. So, don't worry about other little details. Just try to convey something, try to convey passion in whatever you're writing or performing. And to me, that's way more important than other technical aspects. Like when Nirvana came out, their first record, and there's so much kind of polished hard rock music at that time with like perfect reverbs and such technical nature of performances. And it came out and was like, oh, it sounds awful, but it's great. People, it was such a shock to everyone's kind of audio sensibilities at the time because it was so raw, and people were like, oh, the drums, I was like, oh, I could just go to a cheap studio and get that sound. And people loved that about it because it was conveying passion. So, don't worry about the technical aspects. Just try to get something that is conveying emotion and passion, and that will always allow you to err on a better outcome. See, Vusuri Vinay says drop a sick beat with percussion drum kit. So let's see if I could just do a quick beat. I'm not a great beat maker by any means, but let's start with a brand new instance of like a groove agent. All right, so I'm going to do a full groove agent. One of the great things in the full version of groove agent is you get this thing called percussion agent. This is only available in the paid version of groove agent. So let's say I want to load a kit with patterns here. All right, so it's all right, so let's say I want to use some of these sounds. All right, so I'm going to come over here. Let's just create just a quick beat. Okay, so I'm going to just automatically create drum map from the instrument. I'll extend this over. Okay, so we'll come over here. All right, so it's Sorry, it's gotten really awful, but, and let's say I want to take like even like a basic beat here. Like I want to take this, and now I want to add a different kit. So within like the full groove agent, we come over here, we can just add like a percussion agent. Alright, and then let's just load up like Disco Craze. So now that I've just kind of put that on, and we could load up a different kit with patterns. So you could have like, 4 different instances and 4 different kits going at once here. So you could just come over here and again have these 4 different kits. So if you wanted to have that play along with this. If you wanted to combine all of those together, you could just make really sick beats super fast with the full version of Groove Agent. So great stuff that you can do with that. So if you want to make sick beats with percussion, check out Groove Agent full version, especially with the percussion agent. I think is wonderful. Okay, sorry, my chat field jumped. All right, so JVI says, why is it when I log into the live stream that all of a sudden my entire family has 500 questions? I feel the same way during a live stream, so anyway. All right, so we have Ace Amadeus on. Wonderful to see you. All right, and his question is on Cubase 12 or 13 Pro, can you please show an example of applying loop mash to some vocal phrases? Thanks. Okay, so let me just... do something highly inappropriate like this. All right, so loop mashes, kind of think of it like a, performance tool. So let's go ahead and just open up as an insert, and it's going to be found under Other. Let's go to Loop Mash FX. So if I want to do, we can set our rhythmic value here to 16th note. So if I want to, do like almost like DJ style effects. If I want to change the rhythmic pulse slower. Or if you wanted to like do like a little capture section. just might hold that. Just holding that down, so it's like kind of a capture and hold. Chop it. So I'm totally butchering the song, but just give you an idea of some of the creative effects that you can do with the vocal using Loop Mash FX. Thanks for joining us today, Ace. All right, so uno momento, once everyone hit the like button. So. All right, so I've also been granted 1 gallon of Golden Opulence Sundae ice cream. So I have parts of the bass tracks done, so hopefully you should have them done the next couple days. Sorry, it's taking me a while. Just work stuff's been super busy. All right, so you see from DL White says, thanks, Greg. It's a big advantage for me. I didn't know I was wrestling with velocity clutter. And wow, the different sources in the drum maps is really cool. Thanks a lot. Okay. All right, so Mark Raven says, more of a computer question, multiple external monitors, 3, one with VGA, connection 17-inch. If I put Groove went on tiny screen, I get a 60 cycle hum, and other screens it's not 60 hertz. So probably if you have the sync rate the same, it could also be if you're getting a hum, like a 60 cycle hum, it might be if you plug it into a different source, maybe it's a ground loop of something with the display screen as well that could be causing it. You see Jazzy is also thinking ground loops. All right, we see Randy Lee on. Glad you can make it today. Okay, so you see clarification from Paul Claridge. It says, Greg, the overlaps was referring where the like takes, you select the arrow in the bottom center of each event to select remove overlaps. Okay, let me just take a look, see. Okay, so let me see if this is. Okay, so it says the overlaps was referring to is it takes you select the arrow bottom center of each event and select remove overlap. So I think if you're looking for like a key command for that, let's take a look. So I'm not sure if there is a key command for that other than just coming here and setting it up like that. So I don't think it's a key command addressable function, but I'll make sure to pass that along as an option. All right, you see Mark Rabin sending nice comments to Nick Ruggles for his mixing ability. See Jeff Sabelsky just saying, Imperfection, the girl from Ipanema, an interesting vocal story of perfection was the human imperfection of singing almost a little flat with a sexy lilt that made that a memorably perfect song. So yeah, so there's a lot of times, when we cherish the imperfections of a recording so much, technically if you listen to a lot of Led Zeppelin stuff under a microscope, there's lots of errors, but still just wonderful records. There's mistakes in Beatles records. You can hear, bass drum pedals squeak in lots of recordings and, piano pedals squeaking. But if it's a great song, it's a great song, and no one really will care about that stuff. Okay. Just reading through comments. Jazzy is reminding everyone that there's promotion on Nuendo and Spectral Layers. I think also Iconica. So check out the Pro Audio sale. Okay, Red asks, can I be a music producer if I don't know how to play instruments and no prior music background? So yeah, definitely you can be. A music producer is often someone that's going to be kind of in charge of making decisions. So in the traditional role, you had the artist, you'd have the engineer and assistant engineer that were kind of tasked with getting the recording done. And the producer was the one who would kind of make a decision, so this is good or that's bad, or I think we could get a better performance, or wow, if we got this person to play on this, that would be really interesting. Like someone that comes to mind is probably maybe Rick Rubin, who's probably not a traditional musician, but he kind of says, oh, well, this is interesting. This is kind of cool. And he, I got to be in a session with him once, and he just was kind of laying on the couch, and he would just kind of say, oh, that was good. That was bad. It's a very kind of interesting approach, but I don't think he's like a traditional musician, but he has kind of good musical instincts, and he knows what's kind of interesting and what is working musically and what isn't. So whether that makes you a musician or not, or if you have good musical sensibilities. And part of being a producer is, knowing how to get something done, how to convey an idea, how to, make a decision, whether it's going to be, of what's the best for the song or for the album project, and seeing that kind of all the way through and kind of being the final decision maker. Now, a lot of times to be a good producer, you may have to communicate with people in their native language. So if you can't express to the drummer what you think is wrong with their performance or with the part that they're playing, it may take you longer to get there. But if you have the ability to communicate with musicians and people are putting stuff together as a producer, or if you learn tools like Cubase, that you can kind of craft different performances and make an edit to come up with something, you could definitely be a producer without being kind of a traditionally trained musician. All right, so we see Zared says, how to learn Cubase for complete beginner with no prior music knowledge. So obviously, like if you were writing a book, if you had knowledge of, how to write or language or grammar, those things are helpful, but, maybe not necessarily with tools. You have spell checkers in word processors, you have grammar checkers. So, figure out what I would do is, take a little task and, figure out like, okay, I want to do a song. What do I need to complete a song? I need a beat. I need a chords progression. I need different instruments. I need someone to sing if it's going to have vocals in it or if it's instrumental. I need to have a melody. What instrument is interesting to hear? So, figure out those, break down to different, like make a list of what you think makes a song good, and then take that list and learn how to accomplish those things in Cubase. So if you're like, okay, what I want to do starts with a beat, figure out how to make a drum beat, learn that. Then, okay, I need to figure out how to get these chords to work. Use the chord track like we showed earlier to come up with different chord progressions. Look at different chord progressions. There's great chord progressions that come with chord pads here that you could, just start off and use as the basis for your song. Go to different websites and look at chord progressions for popular songs. There's, definite patterns for jazz, for blues, for rock, for R&B, for church music, like traditional hymns. There's definite patterns, and learn those patterns and, be able to kind of build up different parts. But, write down what makes a good song, and then figure in Cubase, okay, I need to take these 6, 8, 10 things and then learn how to do those particular things in Cubase. Let me see, Gareth is going for dinner time. See, Crappy Blonde just says, did you receive the email? I think I did. Let me just, it looks like I did. So it looks like I got the file, so I'll take a listen to it as well and see. Let me know if it's okay for me if I, let me see if it's in the email. So I'm not sure if it's copyright based, but I could see if I could make it copyright friendly if you want me to show it on Friday's live stream. All right. All right, so we see, Greg, where can I get help with Motif XF function issues / clarity in Cubase? Pro 13, 12, 13 Pro, external VSTI function via FireWire or USB without using FireWire's audio card function. So is the Motif XF, does that have the MLAN card? I think that was probably just USB. So, so if you have a Motif XF, so one of the things you want to do is to utilize it as an external instrument. So if you don't want to use the, most of them will have an audio interface, but most of the times when you're working with a computer, you're not going to use your Motif XF as your audio interface. You probably have another interface. And if that's the case, what you need to do is to take the analog outputs or the audio outs from your Motif to inputs of your audio interface, and we need to go to your studio menu, and we'll go to your studio connections, and if you're in Cubase Pro, we can go to external instruments. So once we come here, we can say, okay, we will call this your Motif XF, And what we need to do is to connect this into two inputs that are free on your audio interface. So you have to make sure that you have those inputs that are available on your audio interface. At this point, we would go to add an audio track. We would choose an instrument track. We would choose external plugins. And at that point, you could just see the Motif XF. We'll say add track. And then at this point, we will, as you play MIDI in and out, we will just have the audio out of the motif. As MIDI is going to distract, the audio out is going to an input on your audio interface. And the audio interface will then accept the audio. At this point, we could run it through different... Sorry about that. We could run it, I have kind of just set up in a loop for the input. But at that point, we could run it through the traditional effects and EQs and do all of our processing. So you need to connect it to your audio interface. And at that point, define the input in the audio connections menu. So right here on the return bus of where that's connected to. And then you would load it as a traditional VST instrument. Okay, so you see, it says, I just missed the Groove Agent demo that you did. Can I layer multiple kits and trigger sounds from them at once? I have the full version. So yeah, you can have up to, with the full Groove Agent, let's see if I still have that project open or not. But yeah, you could have access to all 4 kits and play them all simultaneously, so as you wanted to. And how this would work is when we come to Groove Agent, so I'll remove this track, the awful beat that I made. All right, so I'm going to add MIDI tracks. And we'll choose these to go to. Oh, sorry, so I'm going to add an instrument track. We'll send it to Groove Agent, full Groove Agent. All right, so this is on channel 1. And then if I add 3 MIDI tracks, let's say starting on channel 2. All right, so now this will be MIDI channel 1. And then on MIDI channel 2, I could have, so this would all show up under Groove Agent, but MIDI channel 1, MIDI channel 2, MIDI channel 3, MIDI channel 4. So we will come over, add the percussion. So if I want to play, and now, and let's say I want to do different kit here on channel 3. Let's get to studio kit. So we go to this track. And then let's load a different kit into Beat Agent on kit 4. So as we come over here, I select so now these two agents are layered. And we can now play all 4. So if we just wanted these patterns to play. And if we want to go to our pattern overview, we could now switch multiple patterns here simultaneously. And then if I wanted different patterns on different ones, we could just deactivate kind of global pad settings for pattern pads. So at this point, when we hit play, I can play the intro to this, and I can play this pattern. Now I say I want this pattern to play. And I want this particular funk pattern to play. So we could have kind of different independent or have them all kind of grouped together as well. So some like super exciting stuff you can do with the full Groove Agent version, utilizing multiple patterns, because so many songs are a combination, a hybrid of electronic, acoustic, percussion, and that way you have one tool that does it all. So okay, so Captain Streaming says, sorry, could you provide me a simple tutorial on how to do live looping with a DAW? Okay, so let's say we want it, so we'll come over here, let's say we want Groove Agent. I'll build a couple quick sounds here. All right, so I want to add a bass. Okay. All right, so let's come over here. Let's add one more instrument. And if you want to do this with audio as well, it's pretty straightforward. So let's say I just want to come over here. I have this in like a 2-bar loop. And let's say, okay, I want to record. All right, and now it's like I want to do bass. Or we'll all right, let's go down a track. And then if you have audio tracks, you could just, add tracks and then record different audio parts and just kind of use the arrow key on your computer keyboard to go to navigate up and down and kind of keep building tracks like that. So let me know if that's helpful for you. So Daniel's just saying, so rhythm, chords, and melody is done. There another I don't know about. So if you get those 3 things started, you'll be in good phrases. And check out dynamics. So make stuff that's loud and soft, just to make it more interesting. All right, so you see for Ace Amadeus says, thanks, Greg. I always appreciate your cool and creative examples, how to use incredible tools in Cubase. So you're welcome. Yeah, try to do something inappropriate sometimes, but make a point. All right, Chris Hallam asks, remind me, what does one lose when crossing over from Cubase to Nuendo? So there used to be like 1 or 2 very, very minor features that were in Cubase that weren't in Nuendo, but now they're exactly the same. So you don't lose any functionality, you just gain functionality in Nuendo. So that's, so you don't lose anything. You only gain new functionality. Jeff Sabelski says you hear jail doors slamming in Rolling Stone song. So Roland stuff says, hi Greg, is there any way of putting markers inside an event? I've got some long audio tracks that I can't cut up into smaller events, but I need to identify musical segments in the event. Thanks. So what we could do is we could actually work with regions. So let me just come over here. I'll take just maybe a long audio file here. Okay, so let's say we have a long event here. We need to kind of break it down. So if we go into the sample editor, and then in the lower sample editor here, you may have to go to setup and activate regions. So these aren't necessarily markers, but what you can do is come over here and say, okay, we have this. I want to take this and we'll add a region. I want this. Let's click on add region. Let's add region. maybe it's an interview. Okay, so now we could come over, we could give each of these regions a name. Just hit the down key here, you can name them whatever you need to. Okay, so now we have within the audio file itself, we can just navigate to, and we can think of them like markers, but we could see that we have these regions. And when we go into our pool window, and again, that's Control or Command plus the letter P, we'll go to the audio. And we can see that once we've defined regions, that we see this little plus, and this would show us our particular regions in the audio file, so we could treat these separately. So if I say, oh, I really need just that region, I could drag that region out into the project window. So again, we could now if I wanted to turn these regions into separate, we're basically, these regions are defined as a portion, a subsection of this particular audio file. If I wanted to turn these regions into brand new audio files, what we could do is, I think we select the regions, right click, and then when we go to let's come over here to audio, we would say bounce selection. And now that we do this, we could choose a folder. So we'll say regions, bounced, and we hit open. And now all of those regions have been converted into audio files. So again, to kind of start the whole process, come over here to the little setup window, add regions. And then once you have those regions defined, come over here and they will show up in your pool. When you go to the audio file, you'll see the regions. And then if you wanted to right click, go to audio and bounce selection, then those regions can be converted into separate, distinct audio files, but the regions themselves can be treated as individual events if you needed to. So let me know if that's helpful for your need, Roland stuff. All right. All right, DL White asks, can you show how to save and recall alternate mixes in the console? Okay. Okay, so let's say I'm building a mix, and sometimes what's a good thing to do in a mix is kind of build something up, tear it down, start from scratch. So, and we could use this, and often it's going to be used before automation is handled. So let's say I want to take this. So let's say I kind of like this as a starting off mix. We see this little camera here. I'm going to now come over here and take a snapshot. I'm going to select all of my tracks in the project. And we will put on Q-Link, set it to absolute, and let's build a new mix here quickly. So I'm going to take my kicks, I'll take it off Q-Link. All right, so let's say I got my... All right, so we'll do our toms. All right, let's rewind, catch the toms here. And let's take our guitars here. All right, so if I like that, I could take a snapshot. And you put it in Q-Link again. Bring it all down. Okay, I want to start with guitars on this. So I want my guitars. And let's start with maybe drum overheads here. All right, hi-hat. All right, so if I like this, we can now take our third snapshot. So let's say, which one do we like best? I want to go back to snapshot 1, snapshot 2, or snapshot 3. So this way we can just navigate between different snapshots and have alternate takes. But we could now come over here, and if we want to get more detailed, we could see kind of our mix console snapshots. But I could say, okay, on my bass track, we are currently in mix snapshot 1. Okay, so we'll do this, and I'm going to say for this particular track, I want to recall, and we can say, let's do the recall settings. I want this on the selected channel, and we could choose where we want pre, inserts, EQ, channel strip, sends, pan. And this, we could say, okay, I want it only for selected channels. So I'm going to do this, and now I want to go to snapshot 3 for my bass part. So only the bass will change. So we could do it on a selected track basis. And again, this is with all the processing, with all the inserts and send effects can automatically be recalled. So at this point, you could just have different alternate mixes and build up directly from there. So let me know if that's helpful for you. And another method of doing this also is just to, when you come over here, if we have, so you could do snapshots, but another method that people could use is I want to take all of these tracks in my mix console. If I really like the mix I had in the previous one, we can now come over here and save selected channels and also load selected channels. So if I kind of like the feeling I had on a different project, I can save those selected tracks and load it into another project so that we have kind of the same starting off point for our mix. So let me know if that's helpful for you, DL White. Okay, so we see Michael B says, I have a problem with latency after upgrading to Cubase 12. So, check to make sure. So latency can come from two different ways. One is the buffer size of your audio interface, and two, it could also be different plugins that are being utilized in your project. So let's look at the buffer size for your audio interface. So we're going to come over here to Studio Setup. And when we select your audio interface here, we can come over, we'll see the control panel, and here you can see your buffer size. So right now my buffer is at the 512 samples. And that would provide a latency when we look at it, like 13 milliseconds. All right, so that's one form of latency. Now, as plugins are added into your system, those will also incur latency. So some plugins can be more intense, and often more intense plugins will have higher latency. So on Cubase 13, but you have 12 you mentioned, so let's get to your mix console. One of the things you could have in the mix console is when you go to like the little settings, you could have what's called a channel latency, and that's kind of the little value we'll see here. So let's say on my bass track, I have gone to my inserts, and on my inserts, I put a multi-band compressor. All right, so now I've added that plugin. And when we look at this, we can see that that plugin, when we added it, we now have a latency of 123 milliseconds. So as we add more and more plugins into your system, some plugins we could think of it as a plugin tax. The plugin tax is the latency that can be imposed by that processing. So if we get to the vocal chain, when we turn this on, this is in Cubase 13, that's about 200 milliseconds. So just this track with these two plugins, it's having to compensate 359.3 milliseconds. So if we were trying to record something into our system and we had these plugins active, that would cause latency in the system. Now what you can do very easily is to come over, and so we look at the track here, we can see 359.3 milliseconds. These are, but if you go to the far left-hand corner of the transport, and if we have lots of plugins that are imposing latency, we could put on the constrained delay compensation. And then what we could do is just simply, we could have a threshold, and that will bypass plugins beyond a certain threshold that have like high latency, so that we could just come over here. So try if you're noticing it, like when you're playing virtual instruments or recording audio, just make sure that you have these particular plugins so you can come over very quickly and just turn on the constrained delay compensation. And if we go to your preferences and we go to plugins or VST, let's see if it's here, we could say, okay, our delay compensation threshold for recording, that's the threshold that you could have right there. So latency is going to be caused by plugins or the buffer size. So if you just, maybe bypass plugins or turn the plugins off and see if it goes away, or try just to come over here and activate the constrained delay compensation. All right, so John asked, greetings from the UK. I was wondering, film music masters are at 48K 24-bit. Where would a 32-bit export fit in that scenario? Or final masters okay to be exported on 32-bit? Many thanks. So many people will deliver a 32-bit floating point file because that's going to give you more dynamic headroom. And if you're doing final delivery if it's going to mastering, most mastering engineers would want the 32-bit floating point file. It could really depend upon your delivery standards, so it's whatever the requirement is needed for the people you're handing off your files to. Some people want 32-bit floating point, some people, their systems may not handle 32-bit floating point, and they could only do 24-bit. So at that point, you want to just deliver 24-bit. So 32-bit can give you more dynamic headroom, which is often valuable for film scoring. But if the person you're sending it to can't read a 32-bit floating point file, then, it may not make sense to give it to them. So figure out what your final delivery is, but I would always have a 32-bit floating point or 64-bit floating point final file, so that would always be the highest resolution for you. Okay, so you see Carrie Dixon just says simple audio connection is not the issue if using it to access the VSTI plugin page that displays all synth functions of the XF in the page plugin menu that shows like the full menu of the XF. So I think in I'm not sure if the XF was using Studio Manager or if it was actually running as a VST plugin. I know at some point Yamaha changed from Studio Manager and they kind of abandoned the technology, and then they went to a third-party plugin that was kind of the editor for the software. So, I think you would just need to have that installed. So if it's like the third-party VSTI editor that gave you kind of graphic control of the Motif XF, then that should. So it's going to be just you need to have that particular plugin installed and make sure that that is set up to work with the later operating systems. There's a chance that that plugin hasn't been updated to newer operating systems, or if it's running on VST3 or not. So you could check that. See, Terry Gray says, thanks, you give me a new way to use Groove Agent. So it's very addictive once you start kind of mixing and matching different drum kits. All right, Luis Santos Mitchell asks, hey, I'm on Nuendo 13, Windows 10. I'm having trouble with the MediaBay from Nuendo 13. My MediaBay won't open in a separate window, but on my Cubase 13 it does and works normal. Feels like a bug. So, MediaBay is like intrinsically tied to it. So make sure, are you doing it, I assume, from the MediaBay menu here? So let's say or if you hit F5, we can see, we'll just kind of open up MediaBay, but it definitely should open up for you. I'll open up Nuendo 13 since you said it was working in your Cubase 13 but not Nuendo 13. So let me open up Nuendo 13. Okay, I'll create an empty project. And now we'll just kind of come right over here, open MediaBay. Then everything is kind of right there. So, make sure, try in your Nuendo, if you, as you start it, if you hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift and try running it in safe mode. So I'll show you that quickly. But you could run it and temporarily disable preferences. So I'll just show it here. So open up Nuendo. So I'm going to hold down it's Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift. So start it and then hold those keys down. And then you'll get a prompt for kind of like where you can do it in Safe Start. We can say Disable Program Preferences. So try selecting that, hitting OK. All right, and here we get select here. We'll create empty. And now that we have this open, we'll come over here and open up MediaBay. So try starting it with the program preferences disabled and see if that makes a difference for you. All right, so you see Carrie Dixon says, I mean the Motif XF extension for Cubase Pro to import / view song data recorded in Motif tracks into Cubase project. Use of the XF editor VST is my workflow showing my XF setup live. So I never had even though I work for Yamaha, they never sent me a Motif XF to kind of play around with. But see if it shows up under import. Sometimes those different functions. I could check with one of my colleagues that is kind of like the Motif expert in the U.S. And find out what the status is. If you want to email me, Carrie at clubcubase@steinberg.de. I could give him a call right after the live stream and see what the status is of that. Some of that is handled by third-party plugins and sometimes third-party companies, and sometimes their contracts are run out and stuff like that. All right, so we see Roland Stuff says, thanks for explaining regions within the event, Greg. Another thing I didn't know about Cubase, but do now. Cheers. Jeff Sabelski says, Greg, are you using a noise gate on your mic? So currently not. Let me know if I should. I did some processing and it made it sound a little unnatural. All right, Michael Teams just says, free warp, just can't get a handle on it. Please go through it again. Thanks. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so let's say we have particular tracks, and we notice that these tracks that we're noticing can be just a little bit rhythmically off. So we could hear like maybe some of the guitar phrasing and the lead guitar was a little behind the beat or ahead of the beat at times. So it's good just solo these two tracks. So let's say this note here. So what we want to do is, first thing is we notice that by default, Cubase will take our hit points and it'll automatically generate hit points based upon the rhythmically significant points of the audio file. So and we see these vertical lines here that indicates our hit points. So what I'm going to do is go to my audio menu, and we'll go to, and we'll see it's under real-time processing. We'll see create warp markers from hit points. We're going to turn these hit points into warp markers. And warp markers is what allows us to kind of stretch and move the audio clips around rhythmically. So we do that. And I'm going to select my warp, and then we're going to select free warp. So I have these two tracks selected. So let's go ahead and... So now if I wanted to take these different parts and say this needs to fall right on beat. So if I have my snap turned on, at this point I can just have this automatically kind of snap right to being on measure 2 right there. So we could just take these different elements, and what you want to do is we see that it turns that they're yellow lines, and if you don't see them, like at a certain point, depending on your zoom level, you may not notice those particular lines, but you need to zoom in, otherwise it's going to be just all yellow vertical and doesn't make any sense visually. So at a certain point, if you don't see those warp markers. So the warp markers are yellow, and to move the warp markers, what you want to do is, as we come over here, we have both these tracks selected, and as I kind of approach it, we see the two arrows, and to the left of the left arrow we see a little cursor. When that cursor is on the warp marker, then that's what is being moved. So right now I see that warp marker turn white, and at that point I could just kind of stretch and move these different sections earlier or later in time together. So give that a try, Michael. Let me know if that makes sense. But if you don't see it, so the best approach, I think, is to take the already provided hit points and from audio real-time processing to create warp markers from the hit points. And then make sure you're in free warp mode. Zoom in, and when you see it turn white there, at that point you can just kind of move your different parts around. All right, so we see Nick is saying hello to everyone. He's under the weather, so to speak, right now. Wish him well. So we'll all send positive vibes to Nick for a speedy recovery. We miss seeing him on the live streams. All right, so Jeff Sabelski asks, Greg, sometimes my Mode 2 128 8-channel MIDI doesn't show up until I do a hot unplug and plug back in. Is there a way Cubase will force that search? Thanks. So Cubase is looking to what the operating system is seeing. So if you have to kind of unswap it, so if it's not being seen by the computer or recognized by the computer, then Cubase doesn't do that, but Cubase looks to Mac OS or Windows for the for what available MIDI devices there are available to the system. And if it doesn't see it there, so it's not necessarily a Cubase issue, but probably a communication issue with the MIDI interface and the operating system. So if the operating system isn't seeing it, then Cubase isn't going to be able to access it. So it's not necessarily probably a Cubase function. So if it's not being seen by the OS, then Cubase can't see it. All right, so Thrillpunk asks, hi Greg, question, can loop markers be queued up to trigger and switch between when playing a live session? Thanks. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look. Just open up a different sounding project here for everyone. All right, so let's say this is multiple songs here, and we want to set up loop markers. Okay, so I'm going to add a marker track. Okay, so say song 1, song 2. I'm just holding down Command or Command and Shift and dragging. All right, so let's say this is our arrangement, and we want everything to be accessed right there. So we can say, okay, let's come over here and let me just song 4. Okay, so now if we wanted to, we could come over here to our markers. So let's say we have song 1, song 2. So if we wanted to, like as we're playing, then I could just jump to different positions in my project like so. Another method to do something similar for live performance is to use the arranger track. So I'm going to add an arranger track here. And we could set up, key commands or for like a MIDI message to jump to this particular song. So, but let's add an arranger track. And here we can say, okay, this is song 1, 2, 3. So this is our set here. Okay, so now if we wanted to just, play these particular arranger events, we could set it up on our MIDI remote. So let's come over here to like a nano control and say, okay, I want these particular keys to trigger arranger events. So we'll choose functions, and we could have these automatically play to end as well. So we could just now come over to key commands. Let's go to arranger track. And we'll say, okay, this will be chain 1. I want to apply that. Let's play this. And I'll hit this button. This will be arranger 2. This button or key or MIDI foot switch. So now if I wanted to navigate in the project, I could just trigger these particular MIDI remotes. And we could just switch this back to untitled here. And then you could choose to navigate to different arrangers. And navigate like that. So if you want to do live performance, that's a great way to do it. So again, just come here to, okay. Key commands to arranger. And we can have that jump immediately. So if we come here to the arranger track, we could say, okay, on the next beat, and go to different songs, kind of like that. So you use different MIDI messages to immediately go directly to different parts of your arrangement. So let me know if that's helpful. So Jeff Sabelski says, Greg, no, it sounds clean when you're talking. Maybe you have a lovely dry room for your task. So I'm in a basement. My wife is working right above me, so I could hear my wife a little bit through the microphone. And if she uses the bathroom, I can hear it flush. And if my son comes in probably about 20 minutes from school, you may hear him run. But I just have like a little Audio Technica headset mic, so hopefully it's not picking up as much extraneous stuff. All right, so Jeff Sabelski just put new strings on his Strat, says which, let me clear my throat. I'm sorry about that. Which reverb plugin is best for short, hot reverb sound, for clean Strat, for thick sustain? I would maybe try some of the plate reverbs. So it could really depend. One of the ones I would maybe try is if we added an effects channel track. You know, plates are kind of classic, reverbs kind of like very, you know, goes with a Strat kind of thing. So go to Reverence. And then there's all sorts of great convolution reverbs of plates that were added in a number of versions ago. So if we just kind of come over here and we search here for plate, I would, you know, maybe start with, you know, plate at 2 seconds and check out some of those plates. And I think that that may work well with your Strat. Congratulations on getting new strings on your Strat. All right, so we see from Renan Brito. Hello, Greg and everyone. Please, how do I fix the graphic bug of Halion VSTI in sampler track using Cubase 13? Everything is updated. Thanks. So there is a couple of things depending on your audio, depending on your display drivers. So let's take a quick look. Let's go to Steinberg.net. So a lot of it was resolved in 13.02, but you said you had the latest one, but there's still some additional stuff we could do. So let's come over here to Steinberg's site. Let's go to support. All right, so you see graphical user interface errors in Cubase 13, Nuendo 13. So if you scroll down here, you'll see, just in case this fix should not work for you, please follow these workarounds. So you can see for NVIDIA cards, some settings that use, I'm not sure if you've gone through these, or for AMD cards, you could see some of the different options that can be optimized for graphic anomalies that are kind of included with Cubase. So check some of these out as well and see, let me know if you've followed the steps in there. So again, if you look for, if you go to the Steinberg website, go to support, and you'll see graphical user interface errors in Cubase 13, Nuendo 13, and that's resolved it for a lot of people. All right, so I know we had some questions that were kind of mailed in. Let's get to those. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. All right, let me just migrate over. All right. So the first question we had was, can you discuss the new transport start modes? Okay. Okay, so let's come over here. I'll just make some copies of some events here. All right, so now in Cubase 13, when we go to the transport, there's start modes. And start mode allows you to have some different particular ways of choosing where the transport is starting from. So we could put on start mode, and one of the first things that was moved into a more obvious place that some people have missed is when you go to the start mode is the return to start position on stop. So let's say I'm starting my playback here at measure 7, and now when I stop and I use the space bar to start stop, the space bar stops where it is and will continue on. But if I want it to go to, if I start at measure 7 and when I hit the space bar I want it to return to measure 7, what I would do is go to my transport and go to start modes, and we would say return to start position on stop. So now we do that. When I hit the space bar, it returns back to measure 7. Now there's some additional functions that we could do here in start modes. So just to make it easier to navigate exactly where you want to be, we could also choose our start mode to start from the cycle. So if I'm right here and I have a cycle, now when I hit start, wherever my position is, instead of it starting from here, we could have it immediately go to the beginning of the cycle. We could also choose to come over, let's go to transport, start mode, and we could also go from selection start. So if my song position is here and this is selected, it will now go directly to what event is selected. If I have this event, so let's say I'm looking at this and I have all sorts of different MIDI notes within this particular event, and I have this note selected, when I hit start, because it's chosen as event, it'll play from the selected MIDI note. So if I was doing lots of MIDI editing and I would just wanted to hear the changes, the selected event will also carry over for selected MIDI notes. Now we could also just come over here and kind of combine those two, where we can say we're going to start from selection or cycle start. So if I have nothing selected, it'll go to my cycle selection. If I have an event selected, it'll go to the selected event. If I have this note selected, it'll start there. So this way we could either have it default to the cycle or a selected event or selected MIDI notes within an event. So we could kind of use those different options to really, so this way we're not constantly having to move the playhead cursor. You can say, oh, I just want to go right from there, quick edits, and then we could just very easily navigate with the new start modes that we see here. So again, transport, different start modes. So we could do just a regular project cursor position, start from cycle, selection or cycle start. So if nothing is selected, it goes to cycle. If there is a selection, it goes to selection, and the return to start position on stop could be activated right there. Okay, next question. I'm trying to send MIDI from Hallian 7 MIDI instrument to Groove Agent 5 in Cubase 13 Pro. How can I play Groove Agent sounds from a MIDI track associated with Hallian VST? Okay, so let's come over here. Let's say we have drums. I'm going to remove this track here. Okay, so let's say I have just a quick Hallian drum pattern here. So let me just... Okay, so we have that going on, and now what I want to do is to, if I wanted this to play through Groove Agent, one of the things you could do is just simply hold down the Alter Option key and drag it down, and now we could have both Groove Agent and Hallian playing together. Another method to do this, something similar, would be to add a MIDI track. And we want this to go to, let's say, channel 1 on Hallian 7. I could drag that event down. So now this is playing out through Hallian, but it's not playing out through Groove Agent. And if I wanted to send this to Groove Agent as well simultaneously, what I could do is we're going to take this MIDI track, and you can't do it with an instrument track, but with a MIDI track, I'm going to select the MIDI track. We'll come over here to MIDI sends. And as we go to our MIDI sends, we'll say we want to activate the send, and we want to send this out to our plugin and we'll say let's send it out to Groove Agent SE, and now we're sending this MIDI track is going out to both Hallian and to Groove Agent SE simultaneously. So I could send this one track to 4 different destinations as needed. So you could create a MIDI track. On that MIDI track, you'll see MIDI sends, turn on a MIDI send, and then we could send it to multiple destinations. All right. All right, so we see question, hello, I use Cubase 12 AI/LE in Windows 11 and Montage connected through USB. I recorded a song using different MIDI tracks with Montage, and I wanted to export it as WAV file, but the exported file is empty, even if during the export process. I heard the track sounds be processed. How can I manage the internal connections in Cubase to get the song to be exported? So I'm not sure if you're using the Montage, you need to use the Montage. If you wanted to kind of, transfer it as audio, you would need to use the audio interface of the Montage and not just the MIDI interface portion of the USB. So make sure that when you do this, you go to your studio setup, and you may be set to you may see like a Yamaha Steinberg driver, you may see it listed as your Montage. But make sure that you're using your Montage as the audio interface, and then we could set up all of the inputs. I think you could do 16 inputs over the USB. You would need to do the routing in the Montage, go to your audio connections and route all of your inputs here, and then you could just do a multi-track recording from your Montage into Cubase. So you may need to set up 16 tracks of audio and then internally bus from the Montage in. So another question, moreover, is it possible to get the Montage set up for Cubase in a way to get the preset in the inspector and the other MIDI features offered by Cubase? So if you want to, there's probably I took a quick look, but I didn't find one. I left a message for my friend, Yamaha colleague earlier about this, but if we want it, you probably need to come over here and download a MIDI patch script, and then when we go to your let's say we go to your studio menu to studio setup, I can show you kind of how this works, or I'm sorry, let's go to your studio menu, rather to your more options, to MIDI device manager. And then you would need to, if you install the device here, I don't think it might come with it, but let's see. So there's lots of different Yamaha devices. I'm not sure if the Montage is included. I think we've asked for it, but they didn't send it over. But at this point, you could download the patch script and it'll show up here. And I'll show you kind of what it looks like. So let's say if I go to my Korg i05RW, I could define my MIDI input port. And at that point, I could just, when we go to add an instrument track, let's add a MIDI track. I'll come over here. We're going to route this out to my Korg 05RW. So we'll just come over here, say our MIDI devices. Here's my Korg 05RW. So once you have that script, you can now just kind of pop over here and see all the patch names for the device for your Montage. You should be able to see those. So download that patch script, and there will be instructions on where to copy the patch script to. And then you should be able to see all your patch names just like that. All right, so we see a while ago I asked you about a weird MIDI tempo shift in projects converted from Atari formats. I apologize if you dealt with this issue in Hangout and I've missed it. After lining up both the audio and MIDI so that both start at 1.1.10 and setting the signature to 1/4, thought that the last downbeat chord comes in at 500.1154 for the audio, and 458.13.13 for the MIDI. First, I need to figure out what the percentage I need to stretch for MIDI tracks so that they line up with the audio track. Math has never been my strong suit. If I'm lucky, all the projects has been the MIDI tempo shifted by the same amount. In that case, I may use that value to repair the tracks for which I have no audio recordings as well. And do you know if there's a way in Action Logical Editor allows me to stretch the content of MIDI tracks by a specific percentage? So let's say if we want to come over here, let's take our MIDI stretch, and there is a Logical Editor preset. So let's go to your MIDI, and we'll see our Logical Editor, and we'll go to Setup. And if you just look for, like, I think it's under double tempo. Sorry, let me just come over here. Okay, so we'll see double tempo here. So if we wanted to change the percentage, so let's say I have these quarter notes here, and I wanted them to take the MIDI notes. We're going to take MIDI notes that are equal and unequal, and we're going to divide by, and in this case, we're just going to use a simple ratio, mathematic ratio. So I think if you find the difference between 458, let's do just a rough calculation. So I'll just open up calculator here, and let's find a ratio. So I'm not sure why it's off between the two sources. It seems like it should be similar. But it could be depending on your clock scenarios, which we've discussed. But let's go over here to calculator. So let's say 458 divided by 5, I think it's 500. Okay, so you say it's like 0.916. So what we would do in the logical editor here, so how this would work, let's say if I want this to be double, I would say now we could take the time and the length of the MIDI and change that. So let's say we want to multiply, and you may have to choose divide, and we'll say 0.916. 0.916. All right, so we're figure out what that ratio is. We'll come here, and now we could shrink the MIDI so that the MIDI is automatically just going to be aligned with that. But also check to make sure that, you know, the tempos are set correctly and that the tempo track is active on the original files. If it's all set to 120, it could be a different tempo, and that could be causing the issue as well. But to kind of stretch the MIDI, just come over again to Logical Editor. You could start with the double tempo preset. Let me clear my throat. And at this point, you could choose multiply or divide by, and you could put the ratio right there. And that will shrink or expand the MIDI. All right, so it says I have a new question. I have a new computer, Windows 11, Ryzen 9, latest CPU, and also interface UR816. I'm on Cubase 13 Pro, all installed by DAW Computer Specialist. Just starting to use the control room. First is getting sound through monitors and works fine. Secondly, I'm trying to get some sound through the both headphone outputs. When adding headphone and control room, only one headphone shows up with no dedicated headphone routing. Should it be? My main goal is to use two headphones, one with dedicated frequency for compensating my hearing loss when mixing the results, and the second one for using when recording guitar with microphone. All right, so there's two different areas in, let me clear my throat one more time. All right, there are two different areas when using the control room where headphones can work. We could think of, so we come over here to your studio setup, or I'm sorry, let's go to your audio connections rather than your studio menu. And we'll go to control room. So we have headphones, and these headphones are more for in the control room mixing. Okay, so if we wanted to use this for with different frequency compensation for your hearing loss, at this point, if you needed to do that with the plugin, we would go to the phones channel and go to the inserts, and in the phones channel, we could come over and see the particular inserts that we need to do on the phones channel. Now, if you wanted to do headphones for other musicians, instead of using the phones, what we need to do is go to the audio connections, and we could right click and add a Qmix. So we see Qmix has these little stars. So this would be for utilizing the different Qmixes for individual musicians. And with a Qmix, once we have that set up, we would just take this and route it out to the audio interface where and route it to your UR816 where the second headphone output is, and route your phones to where your first headphone is, wherever you need it. So do the routings there, and then you'll see in the cues, once we come over here, we could have your vocals, bass, guitar. So we could have 4 independent cue mixes. The headphones think about that as more like in the studio monitoring, and we could put plugins on each of these so that it could, change the frequencies. So for your hearing loss, to compensate for that without being affected with your total mix process. And the individual musicians would then be accessed for the cues. So if I wanted to take a particular track or all my tracks in the mix process here, so let's say if I add 8 audio tracks or so, we'll go to the mix console. So each of the tracks we could come over and we'll see cue sends. So if we wanted to select these audio tracks here and we want to send it up for the musician, we could say, okay, we're going to take these audio tracks. Let's turn on, I think we could even do this with Q-Link. Let's go to one of the channels, and I'm going to turn on the Q-Mix, and then we could send different levels of the cue to different musicians. I'm going to deactivate the Q-Link. Let's open up one of the channels, and now all of these particular channels are what we can send different amounts. So this way the guitar player will often want to have what's called like a more me mix. So you could say the guitar tracks are going to be louder in the guitar player's headphones. The bass player could be louder in their headphones. The drummer could have different levels and say, I want the bass louder than the guitar player and I don't want to hear the singer. So this way you could have kind of independent mixes of the cues and for the musicians, and then you could use the phones for kind of like your in-studio headphone monitoring purposes. All right, so we see a question from Thailand. I'm running Cubase 13 Pro on Windows 10 i7 PC. I've created a new user on the PC for another person to use that they can use Cubase when I'm not around without access to some of my sensitive files. When I open up Cubase on the new user account, it only shows a few of my instruments. I've gone to the VST plugin page in Studio Manager and have made all entries identical, but I'm still missing many instruments like Groove Agent, Patch Op, and Contact. Any help or guidance on this would be much appreciated. So I think that you have to take those content folders and within the administrator rights, make those available to all users. And I'd emailed, so just, for other people. So it could be that the program is available, but it doesn't have access to all the samples. So go into all of the content folders and make sure that those are available to be accessed for all users and not just the program itself. And I think you'll be okay. And I sent you kind of a description of that for the person that had mailed the question in. All right, let's jump back to our live questions. Thanks for... Again, you could always send questions to clubcubase at steinberg.de. Thanks for sending those in. Okay, just going through questions, catching up to where I was when see, Daniel says, I admire your stamina, Greg. I can't focus for the full 4 hours. So, yeah, when I was in high school and college, I worked construction. And since I was the strong kid, I was college boy number 2. You know, I would have to move houses piece by piece for 8 hours a day in really hot summer heat. So, sitting down for 4 hours talking in a nice climate-controlled area isn't too bad in comparison. All right, 808 King says, hi Greg, I'm learning Wavelab finally and wondering when I'm ready to export my stems like drums, keys, etc. Should I just export them, then import to Wavelab, or is there a way to record them in a Wavelab? So I think the best way is just, when you export, you'll have the files created and then just import them into Wavelab as different stems. So I don't think there's any benefit to recording it in. They're going to have to be exported. So exporting will take faster than real-time playback. So I think it makes sense just to export and import those files, particularly into Wavelab. All right, Daniel asks, where do I click so there's 1 or 2 measures before it starts recording me playing something? All right, there's a couple of different ways to do that. So let me just come over here. All right, so we can have a count in. So if we come over here, we could say, and you may have to kind of move this over to the right. So you see where you have like the metronome, and if we see these 3 little dots here, we can just say, okay, let's go to count in. So now if I go to record, I'll get 2 measures, then it starts to record. So once we activate the count in, now we could also do kind of a pre-roll. So if we come over here, we could activate our pre-roll, post-roll. So we could say, now I want to turn on pre-roll. And again, you may have to just kind of expose some of these options. And we'll say, okay, I want this to be, so if I have this selected and I want it to pre-roll, I could just put it for like 2 bars. So if at this point, if I'm here, I could just say, when I hit play, it's going to roll back 2 bars. And then from where we had started to play. So you could activate count in, and then you could set the count in amount. If we go to transport to your metronome setup, you can set, I think it's, but you could kind of set the count in time. Let me just, but yeah, you could, so here you could also activate pre-roll, post-roll. So you could just kind of come over here and access those as well. All right, so we see from Val, is there a way to have all new channel faders to be set to another value than 0 dB? Greetings and thanks for your help. So I think the default is, as it's added, will be set to 0 dB. Yes, I don't think that there's an option to do that. We could do it for effect sends. We could set to like -6 dB on the sends, but the tracks themselves will default to 0 dB unless you take a media loop here. So if we have a MediaBay, so if we come here, we could just, okay, I want to do this. And if I change my preview volume and then I drag this over, that we can notice that often the preview volume will adjust the fader down. So if I come over here, set my preview volume and drag it in, then the default value is based on the preview volume there. But when adding tracks, it's going to default to 0 dB. Okay, so we have a question. Hey there, Greg. I'm wondering, what is the difference between a 4/4 and 6/8 tempo being used with quantization? All right, so let's take a look at it. Okay, so I'm going to set up 4/4 and 6/8. Okay, so now when we come over here, we'll see, and I'll just, all right, so we can see our 4/4, 6/8 patterns here. So depending on your quantized value, so if you're doing like eighth notes, you may not notice. So let's come over here and I'll put in quarter, let's say we'll start off with eighth notes and I'll just enter in some quick eighth notes via step entry. All right, and I'll take it off loop. So now we're back in 4/4. All right, so now when I quantize to eighth notes, and eighth notes is our value, you won't really notice a difference. But let's go ahead and change this to quarter notes. Okay, so as we put in quarter notes, and we go back and forth. But so if we had quantized, let's just move these off a bit. So, and we'll take our snap off here. Okay, so we have 6/8 and then followed by 4. So let's say if I quantize again to quarter notes, everything will kind of snap to the quarter note position. But as we do this, we have, 6/8 notes equals 3 quarter notes. So the quantizing will, basically still function the same way. It's going to position it in 3 divisions. But if we came over and let's quantize the value, and if we had something like a different rhythmic value, like dotted quarter notes, and I'll just kind of move some of these around here between. So now if it's dotted quarter notes, I think we'll see a bit of a difference between how it's going to be related to. So now if we do this, we could see that in 4/4 that we're going to have, just a different number of divisions between it. But, the eighth notes will start on eighth notes, the quarter notes will start on quarter notes and after quantizing. All right, so we see Pertico Menon just says bye until Friday. All right, so we see Gareth just saying thanks again, Greg. See if there's any other questions. I think we're at the end of questions. Hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick today. If you have, make sure you hit the like button. See, Gareth says, tell me if you have any questions on new songs. So I think it's The Energy, the second song you sent. That was the one you singing, Gareth. If you could, there was a couple chords I had questions on. If you have just a chance to send a quick chord chart, it could be just even in a quick text message or an email. Just kind of list the chords out in order. That would be great. See, Daniel says, thanks, Greg, for the fantastic passion over perfection advice. Can't wait to play around with Cubase without them pesky mental blocks. See you Friday. All right, so Sable Winter says there's so much to learn in Cubase. It's astounding. So glad you can make it today, Sable. It's an amazing program. See if there's any other questions that sneak in. If not, we'll wrap up a couple minutes early. Hope that appreciate everyone spending part of your morning, afternoon, evening learning more about Steinberg products. Yeah, so Gareth, either chord chart or chord track would be great. So. All right, so we see Gerald Ely finally made it on. Says he had meetings earlier this morning. We're glad he could make it. Thanks for joining us. It's always wonderful to see you on from Martinez, California. All right, see if there's any other quick questions come in. I'll wait another minute. There's usually about a 30-second delay from when I speak to when you guys hear me. All right, wait just a little bit longer. If not, we'll wrap up. All right, so it looks like we are out of questions. I want to, again, thanks everyone for being, I'm just so grateful to be part of such a wonderful community, helping people kind of realize their creativity with Steinberg software. I appreciate everyone just taking time out of your morning, evening, afternoon, learning more about Steinberg products. We'll have our next live stream on Friday. Again, next Tuesday, I have to travel up to Boston for the day, so I'm going to all of our typical friends, and I'll see if I could line up a guest for Friday's live stream next week. But look forward to meeting many new people. If you haven't been on Zoom Social, it's just a wonderful opportunity to kind of meet other people in the live stream, and we'll see if we get a guest lined up. And with that, we will go ahead and say goodbye. I wish everyone please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see everyone back on Friday. Thank you very much, and goodbye.